The story of the U.S. Marshals is one so tightly interwoven with the history of our country, it's become the stuff of legend. Movies have been made, and books have been written. U.S. Marshals are larger-than-life characters who laid the foundations for law enforcement in America. But the story of the U.S. Marshals can't be found on a bookshelf or in a movie somewhere. At least, not the whole story. You see, their story is still being written. The U.S. Marshals work with all the law enforcement agencies in the country because of the very nature of their job. Whenever a nationally historic event has happened where law enforcement was on the scene, the U.S. Marshals were there.
How can you be so lucky to be part of something that's so historically important? The Marshal Service is the cog in the wheel. There's spokes, all the agencies, the judiciary, but then the middle is the cog that holds the wheel together. I like to say that the Marshal Service is involved in every law enforcement aspect in America, in some way, and they are. So being part of that cog and that wheel is so important.
I mean, you're talking about an agency that has a number of major responsibilities. You know, fugitive apprehension, court security, prisoner custody, seized assets, special operations, and it goes on down the list.
How can you have a career better than the most oldest, famous law enforcement agency in America? You think of the Marshals, you think of American history. The Marshals have been to purveyors of peace for 230 years. And you actually, in a little bit, your name is mentioned in the same verse with these thousands of famous people. So you feel as if, you would be part of a really special career.
The history of the U.S. Marshals may have begun in the lower frontier America. But the men and women who wear the Marshal badge at events such as the Oklahoma City bombing, 9/11, and Hurricane Katrina are authors of the U.S. Marshal story today. They continue to write a story of proud tradition and humble service that deserves to be told.
I was just blessed, in my opinion, to have the opportunity to serve in that capacity, to serve the people of the United States. My boss wasn't the marshal or the Janet Reno. My boss is the people you see around you on the streets of America. And that was a great blessing. And then to be able to do that with the people that I had the opportunity to serve with, a great career.
The duties were so varied and interesting that it just got in my blood, and I didn't want to leave it.
Historically, we have done more with less than maybe anybody else, any other federal law enforcement agency.
Part of what we did had to do with a desire to really give the American people their tax dollar value. It was because of that desire to really be a true servant to the people of the United States of America. It was a great honor to do that.
I think that's typical of law enforcement for any agency. People that get involved in it becomes your way of life, and you just stay there when the opportunities would be greater to go into some other profession.
Sometimes it's even a story that these great men and women are too unassuming to tell themselves. Such is the story of Dominic Guadagnoli, a U.S. Marshal who was on the scene the day of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and who was in one of the more famous photographs from that day. If he had had his way, the photograph wouldn't even have been taken. The famous photograph captures Guadagnoli carrying a victim of the 9/11 terrorist attacks to safety. Her name is Donna Spera. 10 years after the fact, in 2011, Guadagnoli said he still keeps in touch with Donna Spera. Sometimes they even see each other on the anniversary of 9/11. In the bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City, not only were U.S. Marshals on the scene in the immediate aftermath of the bombing, they proved just how long the arm of the law can be when they launched a nationwide manhunt to bring those responsible for the bombing to justice. The Marshals tracked the biochemist connected to the Oklahoma City bombing all the way to Arizona's Black Mountains, where 3 Marshals wrestled him to the ground. In 2005, U.S. Marshals were on the scene in the aftermath of another nationally historic event, Hurricane Katrina. In the weeks that followed, U.S. Marshals assisted with search and rescue, law enforcement, and in a litany of other ways. If it weren't for the proud history of the U.S. Marshals and those who tell their stories, the tradition of service might not have found its way to the present generation. The investment that the U.S. Marshals have made in our country not only spans centuries of nationally historic events, it's a personal investment that spans the lives of their families, friends, and the countless number of people they've helped and protected.
You know, as far as I'm concerned, it's the finest federal law enforcement agency in the world. Everybody was there, they had your back. And that's what's so great about the Marshal Service. And some of those friends that I made way back then are still very close friends of mine.
Because of the job, I was gone a lot. And I have 4 great kids, and I do because of my wife.
It was hard in the beginning for me to understand what his life was like when he would go off to work, because it certainly wasn't just an average 9-to-5 job. The other deputies became an intimate part of your family also, and their families, because that's really how we would get through some of the tough times. The family is an important side to a deputy marshal's life.
We came a long way from offices that were above a Safeway store in Washington, D.C. to the wonderful headquarters that we have now, from training that grew from people just finding out how to do these things to being the premier agency in the nation in finding people and doing witness protection and all these other things that we do. We were able to give back to the American people great work product, and I think that's what's important. We had a group of people that were very, very dedicated, and I believe they still are to this day.
Being a U.S. Marshal is such a personal investment, in fact, that stories like the one of Dominic Guadagnoli and Donna Spera from 9/11 led people to refer to Guadagnoli as your Marshal when speaking to Mrs. Spera. The width and breadth of the lives touched by the U.S. Marshals might make it only a matter of time before you can call a U.S. Marshal your Marshal too. And whether your Marshal is a legendary hero from the history books, a modern-day rescuer working on the scene of the next national event, or a loved one who has dedicated their life to the justice, integrity, and service that comes with wearing the Marshal badge, your Marshal story deserves to be told. This is the purpose of the future U.S. Marshals Museum in Fort Smith, Arkansas. The planned U.S. Marshals Museum will be a national center that pays tribute to past and present Marshals while inspiring future generations of law enforcement. To learn more about how you can help tell the story of your Marshal and U.S. Marshals everywhere, visit usmarshalsmuseum.com.